Nutshell Conferences, our knowledge partner ACCA, and our digital partner IBM, I once again warmly welcome you to this first edition of Strategy Summit. Ladies and gentlemen, the word strategy certainly signifies future, an outcome, a result which this particular strategy or set of strategies is going to work on to create that future. And future is all about change. Change, the very pace of it is nerve-wracking right now. And it looks that it will continue to be so. The pace of change, my goodness. We are fastly running out of adjectives to describe that pace. Artificial intelligence, digitalization, future of work, etc., etc. It's difficult to keep pace with it. And the best way and the finest way to go about it is to get into a discourse, a debate, and that's what we all are here for. Nutshell Conferences, it's important to highlight it right now, has been involved in this particular generation of discourse and debate in our country from last 2 decades. We have been doing specifically 2 programs, 2 conferences. One we did 2 months ago, which was titled as Future Summit, in which 1,000 delegates participated from the whole of Pakistan, and 50 to 60 delegates were there from outside the country. And in March, the coming March 2020, we are again to organize another edition of Leaders in Islamabad Business Summit, which is a truly international experience when it comes to creating and supporting and encouraging a discourse. Today, Nutshell Conferences, along with its partners, is moving ahead on the same journey, and we have collected a galaxy of internationally renowned speakers, thought leaders, expert practitioners, to share with us their thoughts, their experiential research, and what is happening which we need to catch up with in Pakistan. So from this perspective, and what else we are trying to do from the platform of Nutshell Conferences, Asfar Hassan, by the way, is here with us today, and he will be interacting and highlighting what is there on the course and what is there which is about to come. I'll move forward without any further ado, and I would like to, before I introduce you to our first speaker of the day for the first session, I would also like to tell you a bit that new thoughts, new ideas are very important, as all of us know. That's what the great poet of East, Dr. Iqbal, said, that when he said that Jahan-e taza ki hai, afkar-e taza se namood. So the new worlds are created through fresh thoughts, and that's why we are all here today, to ponder, to acquire, to benefit from this glitterati which have been assembled here today. And let's take our bit out of it and try to implement it to take our country, beloved country, forward. I would like to invite our first speaker of the day, who is our keynote speaker also, Mr. Patchamuthu Illangovan, Country Director, South Asia Region of World Bank. Mr. Patchamuthu assumed responsibility as the World Bank's Country Director for Pakistan on October 1, 2015. Prior to this current position, he has held several managerial, operational and technical positions in East Asia and Pacific and South Asia regions of the bank, and also as a regional advisor in Europe. He has been instrumental as a friend of Pakistan, rather ambassador, in improving our rankings for ease of doing business, which all of you are aware that we have moved up from 136 to 108. So it's a 28 rank improvement, which is going to be very, very important going forward in terms of attracting foreign investment. So Mr. Patchamuthu, a Sri Lankan national, Joined World Bank 1993, has been there in business for over 2 decades now, and he's an environment and natural resources specialist as well, and that's where he has acquired his formal education. I would now request Mr. Patchamuthu Illangovan to please come over and share his keynote address with us. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum. Let me first thank Aswar and his team for inviting me to be here and talk to all of you or share thoughts with all of you. First and foremost, let me begin with a modest clarification. The jump that Pakistan did from 136 to 108 belongs to Pakistan and not to us. And we are a global institution we support with technical assistance. So I really would like the fact that it was a significant achievement of the federal government, the governments of Punjab and Sindh, especially Karachi, which actually accounts for a big part of the ease of doing business ranking. So with that great news, let me share some perspectives on the trends, future trends in growth, strategy, and digitization. When I first came here about 4 years ago, everybody would tell me Pakistan is a hard country, and therefore getting anything done here would be extraordinarily challenging. But at the same time, people told me this is a very friendly people, and so therefore you will be able to get a lot done if you know how to and whom to interact. And I must say, since then, we've actually been reshaping a lot of our work in Pakistan, making ourselves more people-centered rather than just only looking at big institutions and investments. And when we started analyzing why is Pakistan not among the fast-growing economies of this region, when it had that promise in the 60s and 70s, when everyone, when I arrived, would tell me that Pakistan was seen as a global leader among the developing countries in the 60s and 70s, but somewhere along the way, it had lost its sort of direction, and pretty much the growth, the human development, everything flatlined. So a couple of years ago, we thought, let's do some futuristic visioning exercise and see what kind of a country Pakistan will be in 2047, when it will turn 100 years. And some of you may have heard this from me in the past. I've talked about this in other forums, so excuse me if I'm repeating myself, but I'll add something more on the digitization and women's participation and climate change later. And we did similar exercise in Vietnam, in China, and so on. And everywhere we actually helped us to engage much more on a proactive way with thought leaders, policymakers, and so on, rather than kind of in a defensive way where we kind of say, these are your challenges, let's fix it, which often gets people very defensive. So our conclusion is that looking at 2047, Pakistan has two probable pathways. And as an optimist who works in development, so let me talk about the more optimistic scenario so that I can lift up the mood in this audience, since they tell me in Karachi nobody comes for any meetings before 11 o'clock. So Aswar, you're great. You've been able to get everybody this morning at 9 o'clock, which itself is impressive. So if Pakistan sort of introduces the right policies, builds its institutions, attracts more investments, builds its human capital by investing more in people, you're looking at Pakistan becoming a $2 trillion economy by 2042. And per capita incomes would be in the $6,000 to $7,000 range. And your population would be in the 280 to 310 million or 20 million range. So that's a more optimistic scenario. Let's see what is the more pessimistic scenario is if you continue to do what you've been doing for the last 30 years and project that out into the next 30 years, you're going to be remaining where you are today, but with a population of around 400 million people. That's the reality. So if I'm living that long and if I'm able to speak, I'll be talking to an audience double the size of this room. That's the reality that we are confronted with. So we believe that other countries have done it in 30 years, and Pakistan can do it. And China did it, Malaysia did it, Vietnam did it, my own country, Sri Lanka did it. So why can't Pakistan do it is what we think is the central question. And for that, we looked at a number of factors that are needed for Pakistan to effectively address them. One is investing in its people. Now, why I say that is, if you take two indicators and look at, if those are not fixed, you're really going to see a huge human capital crisis before you. Let's take learning, counting numeracy and literacy skills. We recently concluded a global analysis and looked at 10-year-olds and their ability to read and count. In Pakistan, 25% of the kids can do it under the age of 10. 75% don't have that skill and capability. So you're really talking about a learning poverty that needs to be fixed in Pakistan. And we also see kids go to school, but they don't learn. That's a big challenge that needs to be fixed. Second indicator is childhood stunting, which remained flatlined since 1965, but in recent past, it has dropped from 44% to 39%. And everybody thinks stunting is a poor man's or a poor family's problem. No. Even 1 in 4 in the richest quintile, a kid is stunted. So that tells you that spans across the whole of Pakistan. So I think the first is investing in people becomes critically important. Second is your investments in physical investments and capital accumulation. Now, if you look at Pakistan over the last several years, its investment to GDP, or investment rate as we call in economics, has pretty much flatlined at 15%, of which 6% comes from government, 9% from the private sector. When you compare with the other private sector in the region, it's almost half of what you see in Bangladesh, India, or Sri Lanka. So how does Pakistan get its private sector to invest from 9% to 20% is the big issue. So I think ease of doing business has done a good deed. I think governments are beginning to tackle some of the bigger challenges of starting a business, paying taxes, getting construction permits. But 108 is still 108. There are 107 other economies better than you. So the real opportunity here is how do you get to the magical 50 and below, which is not anymore about efficient processes or streamlined timelines. It also is a quality of regulations that need to come. And this is where more effort needs to be spent. And why do I say these two are important for digitization? Is if you don't have the human capital that is needed for the cognitive skills that are required in the digitization world, you really are going to have a big digital divide, and I'm sure 10 years from now, people are going to talk about the well-to-do are better off because they're able to send their kids to good schools, good universities, so they're able to become startup entrepreneurs. But if you look at the poorer kids, because of underlying a lack of investment in human capital, from nutrition to everything else, they're struggling. So this is, to me, are the two important, what I would consider as critical for Pakistan, that $2 trillion dream. When I say human capital, I also must say here the role of women in Pakistan's economy. Today, only about 25 to 26% of the women are in the labor force. And when you look at China and East Asian economies, they're in the 80-90%. So why are there less women in the workforce is something that requires to be further addressed, and proactive measures need to be put in place so more women can come to work. Like, for example, it can be led by the private sector. I know that some of the private sector companies are beginning to have more women on their board, which is all good news. But it all goes down to one important thing which we think in our diagnosis is girls are not spending enough time in schools. They are being pulled out of schools too early. We have looked at cases in which, if you take the out-of-school youth in Pakistan, around 25 million or 24 million, 2/3 are girls. How do you keep girls in schools? Because that has multiple benefits. And second is, how do you protect women working in informal sector? And there is nothing, even home-based work, there is no actual protection for them. To me, this two plus delaying the age of marriage can do, along with family planning, can do a lot in moderating the population expansion that's taking place. So, and recent study by us shows, by the IMF shows that if you close the gender gap, you're going to actually see on an annualized basis 30% growth rate improvement. So let me now move to why all this leads to digitization. Now, Pakistan launched its national financial inclusion strategy some years back. It has a very ambitious target of by 2020, nearly 40% of the population should be banked. It is currently 21%, which is a very low number. Pakistan started its journey on digitization along with Indonesia, India, and so on. They have actually taken off. If I just give you one statistic about digital payments, on the average, a person in Pakistan would do 1 digital transaction per year, when compare that to India's 5 and 7 in Indonesia. So last Friday, we were very impressed with the State Bank of Pakistan, along when our president was visiting Pakistan last week. The governor launched the digital payments strategy, which I think is the first approach towards ensuring that there is more digital transactions between person to business, business to person, government to person. And we believe like if digitization holds and keeps expanding, that alone can contribute to the economy of another $36 billion a year, giving an additional boost of another 7% per year on growth rates. And nearly 4 million jobs would be created when, with your rising population, nearly additional 1 million jobs need to be created a year. And also raise about $250 billion in deposits and formalize the large parts of the cash economy. And it'll also be a big boon as you keep countering the FATF challenges that Pakistan has been facing in the recent past. So I really think, given the youth predominance in the population of around 60%, and if you can start closing the gaps that I identified before, I think digitization is something that can really take Pakistan to the $2 trillion dream. Let me then move to one other, the last point, which I think is critical as well, and which we talk about, and some people think it's still far in the distance, is the rising impacts caused by climate change. Now, we've already seen globally, worldwide, of the impacts are real. They are no more fiction, as some people think, and climate change is here to stay, and we see this in our day-to-day lives, whether it's flooding in Karachi or whether heat waves elsewhere. And we again looked at all of South Asia and what would happen if these climate hotspots get worse. So in Pakistan, there are about 7 or 9, 8 districts from Karachi extending right up further towards Punjab, is that up to about 49 million people by the year of 2050 could get internally displaced because climate hardship will start hitting them, whether it's drought, lack of water, food insecurity. So you're going to really have to confront climate change from today. And here what I'd like to say is a lot of the climate change is still in the advocacy stage, and I think it needs to shift much more towards public policy. So the future of 5-year plans or 10-year strategic vision needs to take into account climate resilience, needs to take into account women's role in the economy, needs to take into account investing in people, needs to take into account giving more space to the private sector. And if all these come together, I really hope and believe that $2 trillion economy for Pakistan before 2047 is possible. So once again, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for giving me this opportunity to be able to have this conversation with all of you. Thank you.